Yo, Big D here on this August 13th, a day that will live in Southwest Florida infamy. Before I tell you about that day that anybody living in Southwest Florida will never forget, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page where we usually talk about sports, but not tonight. And speaking of the Big D podcast, we'll be back next week, so check that out. You can check me out Spotify, Apple, but usually I am a sports guru. I am the sports encyclopedia. I've got more sports facts in my left pinky finger than most people would have in their entire body. But tonight, I wanted to talk about my experience with Hurricane Charley, which hit Southwest Florida on this day, August 13th, 2004. There are certain days that live in everybody's lives. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the day of the first atomic bomb explosion, D-Day for World War II buffs. The day JFK was assassinated in Dallas. The day that the U.S. landed on the moon. Challenger and Columbia exploded. Awful. People, especially here in Southwest Florida, the days that Hurricane Charley, Wilma, Irma, and now Ian hit. And Hurricane Charley, on this day 2004, was a storm that nobody saw coming. Because Southwest Florida had not seen a major hurricane since Hurricane Donna hit in September of 1960. In fact, the paths that Donna and Irma took were very similar because both storms hit the Keys and went in right into Southwest Florida. And we didn't need TikTok, and we didn't need TikTok for that for Hurricane Donna, but Hurricane Charley was a storm that, to be honest with you, I wish we could have seen coming. I wish we would have known it would have hit because A and B, I don't think anybody saw Hurricane Charley becoming a Cat 4, darn near a Cat 5, 145, 150 mile an hour winds. But 2004 was projected to be a big hurricane season because it seemed like there were more. It seemed like after a couple lesser years with that the tropics would not heat up but produce bigger hurricanes, and that one of the areas projected to see impacts was Florida because Florida not really seen many hurricanes. I mean, of course, Andrew hit South Dade County in 1992, Opal hit the Panhandle in 95, and then George hit the Keys in 98, but Florida not really seen a lot of major hurricane strikes. But Hurricane Charley sure changed everyone's minds. And going into that day, going into the time, all the computer models, all the guidance showed Charley going north and striking somewhere and striking the Tampa Bay St. Pete area as a Category 3 with probably 115, 120 mile an hour winds. But you could see, even on those old school YouTube videos, that some of the computer models showed, especially that late Thursday night, Friday morning, the storm veering a little more south, and what that would, and meaning the turn to the north, because the storm was going to head to the north and eventually the northeast into Florida. It was a question whether it would be heading southwest Florida, maybe Venice, or potentially going near Tampa or even northward. Because Tampa not seeing a major, because I'll talk a little bit about Tampa's hurricane luck lately, but generally when storms go south, these puppies not only come in faster, but often stronger. So you could see that Thursday night, Friday morning, some of the computer models were showing the storm going south and making not a sharp turn, but a northeast. I wouldn't say turn like you would see maybe in the Pacific, but a wobble more towards southwest Florida, particularly Sanibel, Captiva, Cape Coral, and then Charlotte County. But all the media outlets I can remember said Tampa, Tampa, Tampa. I don't remember many saying southwest Florida. They were saying 60 to 70 miles offshore, and we might get 60, 70 mile an hour gusts, particularly on the coast, and winds 40, 50 inland. Because unlike other storms that have affected Florida, Wilma, Irma, and Ian, Charley was a small hurricane. I mean, people in South Miami remembered how small Andrew was. I mean, if you went 25, 30 miles north of where Andrew hit, you went into Miami, instead of getting 160 mile an hour winds, they got 90 mile an hour winds. So, well, Charley was even smaller than Andrew. I mean, if you were 10 miles from the eye, 15 miles from the eye of this storm, you probably didn't get winds above 90 miles an hour. I mean, Cape Coral, which is even fairly close to the storm, saw wind gusts, 90 miles an hour. And I remember swimming in my pool because we lived in a 64 in Emerald Pond Circle in Fort Myers the night before, and thinking, what was going to happen with this storm? Because I was wondering, would it go north or would it potentially end up here? And because at our house, there were not many shutters on the house. I don't think we had. I don't think we even put up shutters on the sliding glass doors or even the front door at our house. So, and I don't believe our house was as hurricane proof as these homes are today because a lot of these homes, particularly in South Florida, are concrete and have got new roofs, all this new construction, and there's not more hurricane sound buildings. And I mean, these buildings are made through Irma and Ian, so doing something right with the construction. And secondly, that was the first hurricane I can remember because we were in Naples. I was 6 weeks old when Andrew came through Naples. Fortunately, it went a little south of us because I can't imagine what Hurricane Andrew would have been like in Homestead, Florida City, with roofs coming off, windows imploding, walls collapsing, all hell breaking loose. It would have been a night. It would have been a storm I would never forget. But Hurricane Charley ended up being a storm I'll never forget. And maybe it was just the fact that it was the first storm we could see. And you could see that Friday morning because the storm hit on Friday the 13th. So you knew it was going to be a spooky day. But about 9, 10 o'clock, instead of going north, the storm ended up veering more northeast. So instead of going to Tampa, Venice, or Sarasota, the storm ended up starting to turn more this, let me see, more this way and started wobbling to southwest Florida. So it ended up, so Charley not only wobbled towards southwest Florida, but started gaining intensity early that afternoon and was already a Category 3 hurricane. And then by like 1:30, it was a Cat 4 of 140-mile-an-hour winds. And like I said, we had not put up that many shutters because we didn't have that many shutters. We didn't have shutters on the front door. I don't think we had any on the sliding glass doors. We put up some in the family room, which ended up being big because a tree hit one of our shutters and could have imploded, could have broken the window, which would have been a fun experience. Not, but because for a while we thought the storm was coming to us, and then it was looking more like downtown, maybe Sanibel, Captiva, and then through Cape Coral. And if anybody's been to Sanibel, Captiva, Cape Coral, that area is so low lying, and even in a small Category 4 hurricane, 140-mile-an-hour winds and Lord knows what surge could do devastating damage. But in the end, I don't know. In the end, I don't think people evacuated because I think a lot of those people thought the storm was heading to Tampa or somewhere north. They didn't think the storm was coming this way. But just literally right before Charlie was going to hit Sanibel, it went back to the north and just basically stopped. So instead of going into the Sanibel, it more or less grazed Sanibel, devastated Captiva, went through all these islands: Cayo Costa, Boquilla, Boca Grande, Hine Island, Usepa Island, with 140, 145-mile-an-hour winds. But unlike other Category 4 hurricanes, the surge wasn't the big damage maker. It was the wind. Because Charlie was still moving, despite it stalling for a little while, the storm was still moving fast, about 20-ish miles an hour after it started moving again. Plus, it was a small hurricane, and generally, if you get a big small hurricane moving fast, Charlie, if a hurricane was going to hit land, Charlie was the, I don't know if you say the perfect hurricane, but I guess you would say the best hurricane if you're going to get land because it was a small hurricane moving fast. What you don't want is a big hurricane moving slow. Oh, that sounds like what happened to Hurricane Ian. Oh, no. I don't want to. Yeah, yeah. We know what slow hurricanes do. Not fun. It ended up making landfall near Cayo Costa at 3:45 in the afternoon on August 13th. But again, the surge was not really an issue. Yes, on Fort Myers Beach. Yes, if you were on Estero Islands, it was what, 5, 6, 7 feet. But the storm was moving fast. The eye wall was tiny. It was basically like the size of a pea. But if you were in the eye wall, whether it be Captiva or up the coast a little bit, you went through 140, 150 mile an hour winds, but the winds didn't last an incredibly long period of time. It wasn't like you were in the eye wall for 8 to 10 hours. You were in the eye wall an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. So then, for a while, it looked like the storm might go north of Charlotte County, then it would go south. And then once it started moving north northeast, it looked like Charlie had Charlotte Harbor right in his crosshairs. And what I remember was one of the eeriest and oddest sights I've ever seen. You could actually see, despite not having electricity at the time, because we carried a little portable battery powered TV at the house just in case we lose power. Ended up being a huge lifeline in Charlie, but you could see the water going into the Gulf. And why that happened, because Charlie was moving to the northeast, so the winds would have been pushing the water into the Gulf. If you remember Hurricane Irma, because of where her Irma hit, a lot of areas in southwest Florida experienced a negative storm surge. And a negative storm surge when the water empties into the Gulf. Now, what happened on Fort Myers Beach, especially, because you could see, especially if you were on the NBC2, ABC7 Waterman broadcast channel, which we watch, you could see the water building on Fort Myers Beach, because Fort Myers Beach got the onshore floor, so despite not getting the eye wall, Fort Myers Beach ended up seeing a pretty significant storm surge. Yes, 6, 7, 8 feet, but it wasn't the 12, 14, 18 feet of water that could hit in a Category 4, because thinking Hurricane Hugo, which was a similar size, maybe a little weaker, produced a significant storm surge in Charleston, especially McClellanville, South Carolina. But then Charlie hits Punta Gorda, and I remember to this day, Todd Jakowski was the reporter in Punta Gorda saying right in front of me, I just saw about a 30-foot piece of the roof of the Holiday Inn go ripping off, and I that just sticks in my head. Thinking a 30-foot piece of roof, and yes, hotels are not generally the strongest buildings, but seeing a 30-foot piece of roof go flying off a building and into the harbor or into the Gulf, it's something, because you realize this storm's going to be one for the record books, because despite it being a small hurricane, despite it moving fast, the fact it was a 140-mile-an-hour missile in our backyard was going to cause significant damage. How much so was going to be a question, but Charlotte County took a long time. I mean, Captiva was destroyed, Upper Captiva formed. All those little islands were wrecked. Charlotte County was destroyed, particularly Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte. In fact, I think that all 3 Charlotte County hospitals were destroyed. Fortunately, our house in Fort Myers was okay. We didn't lose any She goes, we lost electricity for 3 days after Charley. There were a couple of trees. One almost fell on one of our windows, but that was actually the one we put up. We put a shutter in front of it. Thank goodness. And then Charley was not done because then Charley had Arcadia in his crosshairs, and I guarantee you, people in DeSoto County didn't think they'd get a major hurricane hitting them. But if anybody's been to Arcadia, there's a lot of older homes, a lot of antiques. It's a very fun place to visit. And despite Charley not having 140-mile-an-hour winds, I think the winds were more like 115 to 120. DeSoto County was pretty well wrecked. I mean, I remember the late Jim Reef and Robert Van Winkle talking how one of the major shelters in Arcadia right now is losing its roof, and we understand there are 1,200 people in that shelter. And thinking that the Turner Center had lost its roof was like, what? Because I didn't know exactly what the Turner Center was. I mean, I was thinking that could end up. And then looking back on it 19 years later, thinking, well, that's more like, not exactly like the Superdome in New Orleans, but the roof in that building basically collapsed. And thankfully, I don't think anybody was seriously hurt, but that was a night people in DeSoto County will never forget. And then the storm went through Orlando, and Daytona still has a major hurricane. So you imagine people in Tampa evacuating to Orlando and Daytona thinking, we escaped the hurricane. Well, Tampa escaped the hurricane, but you didn't because Orlando and Daytona saw hurricane conditions. No. So instead of hitting Tampa, Charley hit Captiva, Casa, Punta Gorda, and Arcadia, Orlando, and Daytona. Who knew the Friday the 13th was going to have so many twists and turns for this hurricane? But 2004 was a historic hurricane season because Charley was just the beginning for Florida. Because later that year, Francis hit the East Coast, and Ivan hit the Panhandle, and Gene basically almost hit the same area that Francis did. Charley, for how devastating Charley was, the death toll was actually pretty low. Let me see if I got it up. He only killed, 15 people directly, which a Category 4 hurricane with 140, 145 mile an hour winds would usually kill more people. But while winds can cause a great deal of damage, storm surge, water, whether it be inland flooding or storm surge, kills the most people in hurricanes. Okay, so remember Hurricane Andrew's low death toll because most of that damage was wind, and Charley was the same way because Charley was a small hurricane moving fast. The area didn't see a huge raft of storm surge. Now, at the time, Charley was the second costliest hurricane to hit. I believe it caused $15 to $16 billion of damage. I'm thinking, I went through the two costliest hurricanes in American history until, of course, Hurricane Katrina hit the next year. But I mean, I think Hurricane Charley taught us a couple valuable lessons. One, hurricanes change course. Just because a storm is going somewhere now doesn't mean the path will change in 6 hours, because Charley changed its path in 5 hours. Instead of going Tampa, came to Southwest Florida. And B, watch out for storm development, because the Hurricane Center doesn't always get storm intensity right. We saw it with Hurricane Ian last year, where nobody predicted Ian would be a 150, 155 mile an hour hurricane. In fact, for a while it was a Cat 5, thinking a Cat 5 hurricane's literally just off the coast, thinking, holy, you know what? But I imagine what Hurricane Charley would have been like on Captiva, Punta Gorda, or Arcadia. Because A, I don't know how many of those people had ever experienced a hurricane. B, I don't know how many of those buildings will quote unquote hurricane proof. Because yeah, there were shutters, but how many people put, and then how many people didn't evacuate thinking the storm was going somewhere else, whether it be Tampa or north of there? So that would have been a night, a day where anything could have happened. And for Tampa itself, some cities have escaped nature's wrath. I mean, Savannah is gone. Well, Savannah, Georgia's gone what? Oh, well over 100 years without a major hurricane struck. Miami, not the Miami area, because people can know Cutler Bay, Brine, Homestead, Florida City, sure know what Hurricane Andrew did. But Miami has not been hit by a major hurricane since the Great Miami Hurricane 1926, and Tampa has been hit by a major hurricane since 1921. And one of my friends told me that if a hurricane's going to hit Tampa, it's likely going to happen early in the year, because the steering currents can just keep storms away from Tampa. But if one's going to hit Tampa, it will probably be weaker. And maybe it's just the steering currents can keep Tampa out of nature's fury. And for some reason, strong storms come to Southwest Florida. I mean, we've seen 4 major hurricanes hit in the last 20 years: Charley, Wilma, Irma, and Ian. But Charley was the first of those 4, and the first of a crazy 2004 year. And then look at the next year with Denison in the Panhandle, of course, Katrina hitting Florida, and then Louisiana, Mississippi, Rita hitting the Texas-Louisiana border, and then Wilma basically hitting everyone in South Florida. In fact, I am pulling up this tweet from Wink meteorologist Matt Devon. Said Hurricane Charley made landfall in Southwest Florida. And the similarities between Charley and Ian are struck, because both storms hit Cape Costa with 150 mile an hour winds and the same air pressure. Now, there are some differences. Ian made landfall at 3:05 in the afternoon. Charley made landfall at 3:45 in the afternoon. Ian was a much bigger hurricane, moving much slower. Charley was a small hurricane moving fast. I mean, a lot of people consider Charley more like a big tornado, because if anybody has seen a big tornado, mile and a half wide tornado, Charley was in excess, what, a 5-6 mile wide hurricane. But if you're in that 6 mile wall, you went through 130, 140 mile an hour, 140 mile an hour winds. But the main differences between the storms came in terms of water, because because Charlie's storm surge was only 6 to 7 feet. Ian's storm surge was 15 feet. Charlie produced 6, 8, 10 inches of water. Ian produced 3 times that much rainfall and damage. Now you do have to look at inflation. Charlie's damage 20, 25, 27 billion. Ian's damage 113 billion and potentially high. And deaths, I believe Charlie killed 15 people directly, and then the death toll ended up being 35. Ian's death toll 161. And when I saw, thinking back to last September when Ian hit, I'm like, knowing how many people didn't evacuate, I'm like, the death toll in this storm's going to be bad, because this storm didn't move and produce a far bigger storm surge. I imagine what would have happened if Ian had come into Tampa St. Pete, because I mean, knowing those areas and have not seen a major hurricane in 102 years. Oh boy, but thankfully we made it through Charley, Wilma, Irma on the East Coast, and back here for you. And I'm like, Charley, I can remember being under a mattress in my bedroom, wondering what's going to happen next, because we're wondering, could this storm get any crazier? Well, and times have changed, because 2004 was before the social media era. So yeah, there were cell phones, but there was no social media. You couldn't get updates every 5 seconds on your phone. Yeah, the internet could tell you things, but basically the television and or radio, once the power went out, became your lifelines, and the meteorologist, no matter what station you followed, became your guideline. And I believe the meteorologists in Southwest Florida probably saved lives, because I imagine what would have happened if people on the Berry Islands, in Cape Coral, or especially Charlotte County, tried evacuating, because I know there were some deaths from people who tried leaving and that didn't go well. But thankfully the building code has become stronger, and the advice I would give, if anybody's going to ride out a major hurricane, particularly in Southwest Florida, knowing our area is so vulnerable to water, be inland. The old saying is run from the water and hide from the wind. You can build a house to withstand 170 to withstand Category 5 hurricane. Nothing's going to hold back water. If you had 3 feet of elevation and a 10-foot surge is coming, guess what's going to happen? The water's going to come in your house. And I know of friends who went through the storm, especially on Cape Coral, Mark Island, Hurricane Ian, and I'm telling you, I imagine there will some storms that leave a lasting impact. I think Hurricane Charley gave a lasting impact in my mind. I mean, thinking back 19 years later, I can remember all these course changes, all the uncertainty, all the roofs coming off, all the windows in pulling. I mean, going outside and seeing all the trees down, all the tree limbs everywhere. I mean, there was no real structure damage in our neighborhood, but seeing this and wondering, wow, because I think we saw, and knowing how close we were to a devastating hurricane, and it's so it's hard to hold back the emotions even 19 years later because and I mean, despite my love of sports, I was a weather geek. Knew so much of weather. In fact, for one of my school projects, I looked up all the hurricanes that hit Florida, and I added the 2004 hurricanes. Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Gene. And thinking back on it and wondering how many more could we add because there's been a lot more. It seems like Florida's become the hurricane hotline, but it's the price you pay. I mean, we all love living in Southwest Florida, but occasionally you do get hit by hurricanes. But hopefully the good Lord keeps us safe from hurricanes, and we don't see another Hurricane Charley or Ian for another 119 years, because Friday the 13th, 2004 was a storm we will never forget, and for those people on Captiva, Punta Gorda, and Arcadia, they will certainly not forget it. They certainly won't forget what Hurricane Ian did this past September, because Hurricane Charley was the first big storm I can remember, and Ian may end up, and Ian will go down as one of, if not Florida's worst hurricanes ever. So, thanks for tuning in I bring back as I describe my Hurricane Charley experience from this day in 2004.